I was standing in my driveway in Phoenix, Arizona, staring at the certified letter that had just ruined my morning when Karen Patterson pulled up in her white BMW with the audacity of someone who believed they owned the entire neighborhood. The letter in my hand was from the Sunset Hills Homeowners Association, informing me that my newly installed solar panels violated community aesthetic standards, and that I had been fined $5,000 with additional fines of $200 per day until they were removed. My name is Ethan Sawyer, and I had spent the last 3 months researching, financing, and installing a state-of-the-art solar panel system on my roof. The system had cost me $42,000, but with Arizona's intense sunshine and the federal tax credits, I had calculated that it would pay for itself within 7 years. More importantly, I had checked every single regulation before installation. I had the permits from the city, approval from the utility company, and most crucially, I had verified that Arizona's Solar Rights Act protected homeowners from exactly this kind of HOA overreach. Karen stepped out of her BMW wearing white Capris and a visor, her highlighted blonde hair perfectly styled despite the 100-degree heat. She was the HOA president, a position she had held for 6 years through a combination of intimidation and the fact that most residents were too busy with their actual lives to attend the monthly meetings. "Ethan, I see you received our letter," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I want you to know this was a unanimous decision by the board. Those panels are an eyesore and they're bringing down property values." I held up the letter. "Karen, I have legal documentation showing that you cannot enforce this fine. Arizona law specifically protects solar installations." She waved her hand dismissively. "Our CC and Articus were established in 2008, before all this solar nonsense became trendy. You signed those covenants when you purchased your home. The rules are the rules, Ethan. The law supersedes HOA rules," I said, keeping my voice level. "I'm not paying this fine, and I'm certainly not removing $42,000 worth of equipment that I legally installed." Her expression hardened. "Then we'll place a lien on your property. We'll take you to court. We'll make your life so difficult that you'll wish you had just followed the rules like everyone else." I watched her drive away, my jaw clenched so tight I could feel my teeth grinding. I had moved to Sunset Hills 3 years ago after my divorce, looking for a fresh start. The neighborhood was beautiful, with desert landscaping and mountain views, located in North Phoenix near the border of Scottsdale. The homes were mid-range, mostly in the $400,000 to $600,000 range. I worked as an electrical engineer for a renewable energy company, which made this entire situation particularly ironic. That evening, I sat in my home office and started making calls. The first was to Daniel Morrison, a real estate attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. His office was in downtown Phoenix, and he agreed to see me the next morning. "Bring everything," he told me over the phone. "Permits, installation records, your HOA documents, copies of all correspondence. We need to build an airtight case." The next morning, I walked into Daniel's office with a folder 3 inches thick. He was in his 50s, with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen plenty of HOA battles. He spent an hour reviewing my documents while I drank terrible coffee from his lobby machine. "You're completely in the right," he finally said. "Arizona Revised Statute 33-18-16 is crystal clear. An HOA cannot prohibit solar panel installation. They can have reasonable restrictions about placement and appearance, but they cannot ban them outright or fine you for having them." "So what do?" I asked. "We send them a cease and desist letter, inform them that their fine is illegal and unenforceable, and give them 10 days to withdraw it. If they don't, we file a lawsuit for harassment and seek to recover legal fees. I nodded. Do it. The cease and desist letter was sent that afternoon via certified mail. I knew Karen would receive it within 2 days. What I didn't know was just how vindictive she could be. 3 days later, I came home from work to find a notice taped to my front door. The HOA had scheduled an emergency hearing for the following week to discuss multiple violations at my property. In addition to the solar panels, they were now claiming my desert willow tree was too tall, my house number wasn't the approved font, and my garage door had a small dent that violated maintenance standards. I called Daniel immediately. They're retaliating. Absolutely they are, he agreed. But they're also digging themselves deeper. Keep documentation of everything. Take photos, save every letter, record dates and times of all interactions. The hearing was held in the community clubhouse on a Tuesday evening. The room was set up like a courtroom, with Karen and 4 other board members sitting at a long table at the front. There were about 15 other residents in attendance, most of them looking uncomfortable with the whole proceeding. Karen called the meeting to order with a gavel, which I found ridiculous. We're here to discuss the multiple violations at 4521 Desert Vista Drive, the property of Ethan Sawyer. I stood up. Before we begin, I want to state for the record that I have legal counsel, and this entire proceeding is being conducted in retaliation for my refusal to pay an illegal fine. One of the board members, a nervous-looking man named Robert Chen, shifted uncomfortably. Karen, maybe we should consult with our attorney before. We don't need an attorney, Karen snapped. We have clear rules and Mr. Sawyer has violated them. Now, let's begin with the solar panels. For the next hour, they went through each supposed violation. The solar panels were visually disruptive. My desert willow tree exceeded the height restriction by 6 inches. My house numbers, which were the same bronze numbers that had been there when I bought the house, were apparently supposed to be in a specific font called Trajan Pro. The tiny dent in my garage door was deemed neglected maintenance. When they finally let me speak, I presented printed copies of Arizona's solar rights law, my permits, and photographs showing that at least a dozen other homes in the neighborhood had issues identical to mine that had never been cited. This is selective enforcement, I said, holding up photos of 3 other homes with dented garage doors, 2 with trees taller than mine, and 1 with house numbers that were spray painted on. You're targeting me specifically because I stood up to you. Karen's face flushed red. We'll address those properties in due time. Right now, we're discussing your violations. The board votes to uphold all fines. $5,000 for the solar panels, $1,000 for the tree, $500 for the house numbers, and $500 for the garage door. Total of $7,000, due within 30 days, or we will place a lien on your property. Robert Chen abstained from the vote. The other 3 board members voted with Karen. I walked out of that meeting knowing that this situation was going to get much worse before it got better. What I didn't know was just how much worse, or how the unique circumstances of my property would give me leverage I never expected. When I had purchased my home 3 years ago, one of the selling points had been a small outbuilding behind the main house. The previous owner had used it as a workshop. It was about 400 square feet, and it came with its own electrical service because the previous owner had run heavy machinery that required 240-volt power. What made this setup unusual was how the property had been subdivided years ago. My lot was actually 2 parcels that had been combined. The outbuilding sat on what had technically been a separate lot before the combination. When the solar company had done their assessment, They had noted that my property had two separate electrical meters, one for the main house and one for the outbuilding. During my solar installation, I had connected panels to both meters, maximizing my roof space and energy production. But here was the interesting part. I had also installed a battery backup system, something that was becoming increasingly popular in Arizona due to our summer storms and occasional grid instability. My system could run my entire property off-grid if needed. A few days after the hearing, I was out in my workshop when I noticed something odd. I was doing some electrical diagnostics, and I pulled up the utility company's online portal to check my energy data. That's when I saw that my outbuilding's meter wasn't just servicing my outbuilding. According to the utility maps, when the neighborhood had been developed, the builder had run the electrical service in an unusual way to save money. My outbuilding's meter fed my workshop, but it also fed a junction box that supplied power to the community clubhouse, the pool equipment room, and the decorative lighting throughout the common areas. I stared at my computer screen for a long moment, my engineering brain putting the pieces together. The developer had probably gotten permission from the original property owner to run the service this way, saving the cost of a separate meter for the HOA facilities. When the property had sold over the years, nobody had bothered to update the electrical configuration. The HOA had probably been paying me, or more accurately the previous owners, a small credit on the utility bill for this arrangement. But it was buried in the complex web of HOA fees and utilities. I dug through my closing documents and found it, a clause stating that I would receive a $25 monthly credit on my HOA dues for utility easement. I had never paid attention to it, assuming it was some standard Arizona utility thing. But this meant that the HOA's common facilities were running on electricity that came through a meter in my name, on my property. I was legally responsible for that meter, and I had every right to disconnect it. I called Daniel Morrison. I need to know the exact legal boundaries of what I can do with electrical service on my property. After I explained the situation, there was a long pause. Ethan, you need to be very careful here. Yes, you have the right to control electrical service on your property, but you could open yourself up to claims of extortion or illegal shutoff if you're not careful. What if I'm not trying to extort anyone? I said. What if I'm simply disconnecting a service that I no longer want to provide, especially given that the HOA is actively harassing me? You would need to provide notice, Daniel said. Reasonable notice that you're terminating the arrangement. 30 days would be standard. And you cannot make this contingent on them dropping the fines. It has to be a separate business decision. What if my reason is that I'm upgrading my electrical system to be fully solar, and I need to reconfigure all my connections? Daniel was quiet for a moment. That would be a legitimate reason. You're within your rights to modify your own electrical system. But Ethan, think about what you're doing here. This is going to escalate things significantly. They've already escalated it, I said. They're trying to steal $7,000 from me for violations that either aren't violations at all or are being selectively enforced. I'm done playing nice. That weekend, I drafted a letter to the HOA board. It was professional and straightforward. Due to my recent solar installation and my decision to move toward energy independence, I would be reconfiguring all electrical service on my property. As a result, the utility easement that provided power to HOA common facilities would be terminated in 30 days. I provided the specific date and time, June 15th at 6 p.m. I sent the letter via certified mail and email to all 5 board members. Then I waited. The response came within 2 days. Karen called me directly, her voice shaking with rage. "You cannot cut power to HOA facilities. That's illegal. That's extortion." "It's neither," I said calmly. "I'm simply reconfiguring my electrical system. I gave you 30 days notice, which is more than generous. You'll need to make arrangements with the utility company to install your own meter." "This is because of the fines," she said. "You're trying to blackmail us." "The two issues are completely separate," I said. "I would be reconfiguring my system regardless. I'm moving toward complete energy independence with solar and battery backup. Your easement is a complication I no longer want to deal with." "We have a legal agreement," she insisted. "No, we have an informal arrangement that either party can terminate. Check with your attorney." I already checked with mine. She hung up on me. The next morning, I found dog feces smeared on my front door. I cleaned it up, photographed it, and filed a police report. The officer who responded was sympathetic but realistic. "HOA disputes can get ugly," he said. "I can't prove who did this, but I'll include it in the report. Keep your security camera footage if you have it." I did have cameras, and I spent that afternoon upgrading my security system, adding more cameras and motion sensors. If Karen wanted to play dirty, I was going to document everything. The HOA held another emergency meeting, this one specifically about the power situation. I didn't attend, but Robert Chen, the board member who had abstained before, called me afterward. "Ethan, I want you to know that not everyone on the board agrees with Karen's approach," he said. "I've been reviewing the solar panel issue and I think she's wrong. But she's dug in now, and the utility situation has made everything worse. Robert, I appreciate that, but I'm not backing down. They can drop the illegal fines and we can all move on, or they can deal with the consequences of their actions. The utility company says it will cost $12,000 to install a new meter and run new service to the clubhouse," he said. "That's going to come out of the HOA reserves, which means a special assessment for everyone." "That's unfortunate," I said, "but it's not my problem. They shouldn't have been using my electrical service without a proper contract in the first place." Over the next 3 weeks, the tension in the neighborhood became palpable. Someone slashed 2 of my tires. More dog waste appeared on my driveway. I received anonymous letters calling me selfish and threatening. I documented everything and kept adding to the police reports. But I also started hearing from other neighbors who supported me. Margaret Wilson, a retired teacher 2 houses down, stopped by with cookies and an apology. "I'm sorry for what you're going through," she said. "Karen has been a tyrant for years. Most of us are too afraid to speak up because she makes life hell for anyone who crosses her. But what she's doing to you is wrong." "Did you vote for her?" I asked. Margaret looked embarrassed. "There was never another candidate. She runs unopposed every year, and most people don't even know when the elections are. She controls the communication." That gave me an idea. I started researching HOA election procedures in Arizona. According to state law, any homeowner could run for the board, and elections had to be held annually with proper notice to all residents. I pulled up the HOA bylaws and discovered that Karen had been violating numerous procedural requirements for years. Elections were supposed to be in November, but she had been postponing them, claiming continuity was important. I shared this information with Daniel Morrison. "Can we force an election?" "Absolutely," he said. "In fact, homeowners can call for a special meeting and vote to remove board members for cause. You need 20% of homeowners to sign a petition. There were 140 homes in Sunset Hills. I needed 28 signatures." I spent the next week walking the neighborhood, knocking on doors and explaining the situation. What I found surprised me. People were fed up with Karen. She had been fining residents, blocking reasonable modifications to homes, and generally making everyone miserable. My situation was just the most extreme example. Within 10 days, I had 43 signatures. I submitted the petition following the exact procedures outlined in the bylaws. A special election meeting was scheduled for June 20th, 5 days after my power disconnection date. June 15th arrived on a Friday. I had spent the previous day double-checking my electrical setup, ensuring that my home and workshop were completely isolated on my solar system with battery backup. At exactly 6 p.m., I walked out to my utility box and threw the breaker that disconnected the feed to the HOA junction box. The effect was immediate. The decorative lights along the streets went dark. The pool equipment shut down. And the clubhouse, where Karen happened to be holding a finance committee meeting, went completely black. I watched from my driveway as confused residents came out of their homes. Some checked their own power, saw that it was fine, and looked around in confusion. A few called the utility company. And Karen stormed out of the clubhouse, her face illuminated by her phone's flashlight, heading straight for my house. "Turn it back on," she demanded when she reached my driveway. "Turn the power back on right now." "I can't," I said simply. "I've reconfigured my system. My solar setup is now isolated. You'll need to contact the utility company about getting your own service installed. You did this deliberately. You're trying to sabotage the HOA. I gave you 30 days notice. That's twice the legal requirement. What you do with your electrical needs is not my concern." She was shaking with rage. "This is illegal. I'm calling the police." "Please do," I said. "I'd be happy to explain to them how you've been harassing me, vandalizing my property, and attempting to enforce illegal fines." The police did come, about an hour later. 2 officers listened to Karen's complaint, then asked to speak with me privately. I showed them my documentation, the notice I had sent, proof that the electrical service was indeed on my property and in my name, and my attorney's written opinion that I had every right to disconnect it. The older officer, a sergeant named Williams, reviewed everything carefully. "Madam," he said to Karen, "Mr. Sawyer hasn't done anything illegal. This is a civil matter between you and him regarding property use. You'll need to work with your utility company to establish your own service." "But he did this to retaliate against the HOA," Karen protested. "His motivation doesn't matter," Sergeant Williams said. "He can't be forced to provide electrical service to your facilities. You'll need to handle this through civil channels." After the police left, Karen stood in the street, her face red, her hands clenched into fists. Several residents had gathered, watching the spectacle. I saw people whispering, some pointing at Karen, others at me. Margaret Wilson approached Karen. "Maybe it's time to drop the fines against Ethan and work this out reasonably." "Stay out of this, Margaret," Karen snapped. "We can't stay out of it," another resident said. This was Tom Fletcher, who lived on the next street over. "The pool is down. The street lights are out. This affects all of us, and it's happening because you've been on a power trip." "There's going to be a special election meeting in 5 days," I said, addressing the growing crowd. "Every homeowner is welcome to attend. We'll be voting on new board leadership and discussing the direction of this HOA. I encourage everyone to come and make their voice heard." Over the weekend, the neighborhood was dark at night. The pool remained closed. The HOA had to rent temporary lighting for the streets. Emergency signs went up at the clubhouse announcing it was closed until further notice, and the residents were not happy. I spent those days preparing for the meeting, creating a presentation that outlined everything that had happened, complete with documentation of the illegal fines, the selective enforcement, the violations of election procedures, and Karen's pattern of harassment. But I also discovered something else while reviewing the HOA financial records, which were supposed to be available to all homeowners. The records showed that the HOA had spent nearly $80,000 over the past 2 years on legal fees, all of them related to disputes with homeowners that Karen had initiated. We had a reserve fund that was supposed to be for major repairs, but it had been depleted by legal costs. More concerning, there were several payments to KP Consulting for community management services, totaling $36,000 over 3 years. KP Consulting didn't appear to be a real company. I couldn't find any business registration for it in Arizona. I called Daniel Morrison again. I think Karen might be embezzling from the HOA. He advised me to be very careful about making accusations without proof, but suggested that if I had evidence of financial irregularities, they should be raised at the meeting, and a forensic audit should be requested. The night of June 20th, the clubhouse was packed. Someone had run an extension cord from a nearby house to power some temporary lights. Every seat was filled and people stood along the walls. All 5 board members were present, with Karen at the center, looking defiant. I had requested speaking time according to the proper procedures, and Robert Chen, who was acting as secretary, had granted it. When Karen tried to start the meeting with other business, multiple residents shouted her down. "We're here about the petition," Margaret Wilson said firmly. "Let's address it." Karen's face was tight. "Fine. Ethan Sawyer has circulated a petition calling for a vote of no confidence in the current board. This is clearly retaliatory, and it's a legal right of the homeowners," Robert Chen interrupted. "And I think we need to take it seriously. There are serious questions about how this board has been operating." For the next hour, I presented my findings. I showed the documentation of the illegal solar panel fine and how it violated state law. I presented evidence of selective enforcement, with photos of violations throughout the neighborhood that had never been cited. I showed the financial records indicating excessive legal spending and the suspicious payments to KP Consulting. When I mentioned KP Consulting, Karen's face went white. "That's a legitimate consulting firm that provides management expertise. Then you should have no problem providing documentation of what services they performed," I said, "because I can't find any business registration for KP Consulting in Arizona, Nevada, or California. And interestingly, the initials match your name, Karen Patterson." The room erupted in angry murmurs. Robert Chen looked shocked. The other board members were looking at each other in confusion. "This is slander," Karen said, standing up. "I won't sit here and be accused of crimes by someone who's trying to destroy this community." "Then let's call for an independent audit," Tom Fletcher said. "If everything is legitimate, you have nothing to worry about." A motion was made and seconded. When the vote was called, it was nearly unanimous. Only Karen and one other board member voted against it. The audit was approved. Then came the vote on the board itself. By the HOA bylaws, a vote of no confidence required 2/3 approval. When the ballots were counted, 78% of the homeowners present voted to remove the entire board. New elections were scheduled for the following month. Karen left the meeting without speaking to anyone. Over the next few weeks, the situation accelerated rapidly. An accounting firm conducted the audit and found that Karen had indeed been paying herself through the fake consulting company. The total amount was $41,000 over 3 years. The HOA hired a real attorney, not the one Karen had been using, and that attorney advised filing criminal charges. The Phoenix Police Department's white-collar crime unit got involved. Karen was arrested on charges of theft, fraud, and embezzlement. The case moved through the system over the following months. Karen initially tried to claim that the payments were legitimate compensation for her work as HOA president, but the bylaws clearly stated that board positions were volunteer. Her attorney negotiated a plea deal. She would plead guilty to fraud, pay back the full amount plus damages, and serve 2 years of probation with 6 months of home detention. The new HOA board, which included Robert Chen as president and Margaret Wilson as vice president, met with me privately in August. "We want to formally apologize for everything that happened," Robert said. "The solar panel fine has been rescinded. All the other fines have been dropped. And we're working with the utility company to establish proper service to the common areas. We'd also like to ask if you'd be willing to restore the temporary connection until the new meter is installed," Margaret added. "The utility company says it will take another month and the pool has been closed all summer. We'll pay you fairly for the electricity used." I considered it. "I'll do it on 2 conditions. First, the HOA updates its rules to explicitly protect solar installations and other sustainable home improvements. Second, you establish a clear process for reviewing architectural requests that's fair and transparent." They agreed immediately. I reconnected the power that afternoon, and the utility company installed the new meter system 3 weeks later. My outbuilding went back to servicing just my workshop, as it should have been all along. In September, I received a check from the HOA for $3,000. It was my portion of the recovered funds from Karen's embezzlement, distributed proportionally to all homeowners based on what they had paid in HOA dues during the period of the theft. The neighborhood settled into a calmer routine. The new board operated transparently, publishing meeting minutes and financial reports online. Several other residents installed solar panels. Margaret Wilson started a neighborhood garden in a common area that had been underutilized. The pool stayed open later in the season than it ever had under Karen's management. I ran into Karen one time after her sentencing. It was at a grocery store in Scottsdale, several miles from our neighborhood. She was wearing an ankle monitor under her pants, and she looked older, tired. When she saw me, she started to turn away but then stopped. "I suppose you're happy," she said. "No," I replied honestly. "I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to put solar panels on my house." "I was trying to protect property values," she said, "to keep the neighborhood looking nice." "Is that so wrong?" "It is when you break the law to do it," I said. "And when you steal from your neighbors. You could have worked with me, Karen. Instead, you chose to make it personal." She didn't respond. She just pushed her cart past me and disappeared down another aisle. I never saw her again. The following spring, I was elected to the HOA board myself. I hadn't planned to run, but several neighbors convinced me that my experience and knowledge could help prevent future problems. I accepted the position of treasurer, figuring my engineering background and attention to detail would serve the community well. During my first month, I implemented a new financial tracking system that provided real-time transparency for all homeowners. Every expenditure was documented and explained. We negotiated better rates for landscaping and pool maintenance by opening the contracts to competitive bidding instead of using the vendors Karen had handpicked. The HOA's reserve fund began to recover. Property values actually increased, driven not by rigid aesthetic rules but by the community's reputation for being well managed and welcoming. Several real estate agents told prospective buyers that Sunset Hills was the rare HOA that actually added value rather than creating problems. My solar panels continued to generate power, exceeding my initial estimates thanks to Phoenix's relentless sunshine. My electricity bills averaged less than $20 per month, mostly grid connection fees. Over time, the panels paid for themselves even faster than I had calculated. Other neighborhoods began reaching out to our HOA, asking for advice on governance and solar policies. I found myself giving presentations at community meetings, sharing the lessons learned from our experience. The main lesson was simple. HOAs should serve their communities, not control them. Rules need to be reasonable, legally sound, and consistently enforced. 2 years after the entire ordeal began, I was standing in my driveway at sunset, watching the light fade over the mountains. The solar panels on my roof glinted in the dying light, and I felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond the money saved on electricity. This had become about something bigger, standing up for what was right, holding people accountable, and helping to create a community where people wanted to live, not one they felt trapped in. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom Fletcher. "Board meeting tomorrow night. Margaret is bringing her famous cookies. Don't be late." I smiled and replied that I would be there. The neighborhood had come a long way from those dark days when Karen ruled with an iron fist and people were afraid to speak up. Now we had a community where people participated, where voices were heard, and where conflicts were resolved through communication rather than confrontation. The street lights came on, powered now by the HOA's own meter system, properly installed and managed. The pool lights glowed blue in the distance. Somewhere a dog barked, and I heard children laughing as they played in a nearby yard. These were the sounds of a healthy neighborhood, one that had survived its crisis and come out stronger. I went inside my house, my solar-powered house, and felt grateful for the quiet victory. Justice had been served. The community had been restored. And my panels continued to do exactly what they were designed to do. Harvest the abundant Arizona sunshine and convert it into clean, renewable energy, saving me money and reducing my carbon footprint. Looking back, I could see how every step of the journey had been necessary. If Karen had simply dropped the illegal fine when I first challenged it, none of the rest would have happened. Her embezzlement would have continued. The HOA would have remained dysfunctional. Other residents would have continued to suffer under her arbitrary rules. Sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone. Sometimes fighting your own battle means winning a war you didn't even know was being fought. And sometimes, the simple act of installing solar panels on your roof can expose corruption, topple a tyrant, and transform a community. The electrical disconnection, dramatic as it was, had served as the catalyst that forced the situation to a head. It brought the conflict out of the shadows and into the light, quite literally. It showed other residents that Karen wasn't invincible, that her authority could be challenged, and that the systems existed to protect homeowners from exactly this kind of abuse. I never regretted my decision to fight back, even during the darkest moments when my tires were being slashed and my property was being vandalized. Backing down would have meant accepting injustice, not just for myself, but for everyone who came after me. It would have meant letting fear win over principle. The legal system had worked, eventually. The police had done their job. The courts had delivered justice. The democratic processes embedded in HOA law had allowed homeowners to reclaim control of their community. But none of it would have happened if someone hadn't been willing to stand up and say no to illegal demands and abusive authority. As I prepared for bed that night, I checked the app on my phone that monitored my solar system. The batteries were fully charged, ready to power my home through the night and into the next morning. The system had generated 43 kilowatt hours that day, more than enough for my needs with excess fed back into the grid for credit. I thought about the journey from that first certified letter to this moment of peace and resolution. It had been stressful, expensive in terms of legal fees, and emotionally draining. But it had been worth it. The precedent set by the case had implications beyond just our neighborhood. Other HOAs in Arizona would think twice before trying to block solar installations. Other board members would be more careful about following the law and managing funds appropriately. The ripple effects of standing up for yourself can be impossible to predict. Margaret Wilson told me that she had been inspired to run for the board because she saw that change was possible. Tom Fletcher said he had stopped letting his own HOA in his previous neighborhood push him around, leading to positive changes there as well. Even Robert Chen admitted that he had been too passive for too long, enabling Karen's behavior by not speaking up sooner. Everyone had learned something from the experience. I had learned that having the law on your side matters, but you still have to be willing to fight for your rights. I had learned that communities are stronger than individuals, but communities need individuals willing to take the first step. And I had learned that sometimes the most effective form of protest is simply refusing to participate in an unjust system. The disconnection of power to the HOA facilities had been symbolic as much as practical. It demonstrated that authority flows both ways, that those in power rely on the cooperation of those they govern, and that when cooperation is withdrawn, power evaporates quickly. Karen had relied on people being too intimidated or apathetic to challenge her. Once someone did, her entire structure collapsed. In the years that followed, Sunset Hills became known as one of the best managed HOAs in the Phoenix area. Our property values remained strong even through market fluctuations. Our common areas were well maintained but not obsessively controlled. People wanted to live there because it was a real community, not a collection of houses ruled by arbitrary regulations. I eventually sold my house in Sunset Hills, not because of any lingering problems, but because I received a job offer that required relocating to San Diego. The buyers were specifically attracted to the property because of the solar panels, which I had maintained meticulously. They paid $20,000 over asking price, citing the energy savings as a major factor in their decision. At the closing, the real estate agent told me that homes with solar panels in well-managed HOA communities were premium properties. "You did future owners a favor by fighting that battle," she said. "The policy changes you pushed through have made every home in Sunset Hills more valuable." Before I left Phoenix, the HOA held a small gathering to see me off. Margaret presented me with a plaque that read, "To Ethan Sawyer, who stood up when it mattered and made Sunset Hills a better place for everyone." It was a simple gesture, but it meant more to me than any monetary reward could have. Robert Chen pulled me aside. "You know, when this all started, I thought you were being stubborn and making things harder for everyone. I didn't understand why you couldn't just compromise, maybe move the panels to a less visible part of the roof or something. But you taught me that some things aren't about compromise. Some things are about principle." "The law was on my side," I said. "That's what people need to remember. It wasn't just stubbornness. I had the legal right to those panels, and they were trying to steal that right through intimidation." "A lot of people would have backed down anyway," he replied. "Legal rights don't matter if you're too afraid to assert them." As I drove away from Sunset Hills for the last time, I looked back at the neighborhood in my rearview mirror. The street lights were on. The pool was open, with kids splashing and playing. The clubhouse had a sign advertising a community barbecue for the following weekend. It looked like what it should have always been, a place where people lived their lives, not a battleground controlled by a petty tyrant. The story of my solar panels and the HOA battle became something of a local legend. I heard that law professors at Arizona State University used it as a case study in property rights and HOA governance. Solar installation companies mentioned it when talking to worried homeowners about HOA restrictions. It became shorthand for the importance of knowing your rights and standing up to illegal demands. Looking back now, years later, I can see the full arc of what happened. It started with one person making a decision to do something beneficial for themselves and the environment. It escalated because someone in authority refused to accept that there were limits to their power. It exploded into a full-scale conflict because neither side would back down. And it resolved through a combination of legal action, community organizing, and the exposure of deeper corruption. The disconnection of power had been the turning point, the moment when the conflict moved from abstract legal arguments to concrete consequences. It forced everyone to choose sides and take action. It created urgency where there had been complacency. And it demonstrated that even in an unequal power dynamic, the person with less formal authority might have more practical leverage than anyone realizes. Would I do it all again? Absolutely. The stress and conflict were real, but so were the results. An embezzler was caught and punished. A dysfunctional HOA was reformed. A community was strengthened. And solar panels, along with other reasonable home improvements, were protected for future residents. The key lessons from the experience have stayed with me and influenced how I approach conflicts in all areas of my life. Know your rights and know the law. Document everything. Build coalitions with others who share your interests. Use the systems available to you, whether legal, political, or practical. And don't be afraid to use leverage when you have it, as long as you do so legally and ethically. The solar panels themselves, the hardware that started everything, were never really what the fight was about. They were the catalyst, the line in the sand, but the real issue was about power, accountability, and the rule of law. It was about whether an HOA board could violate state statutes and get away with it. It was about whether one person's vision of community standards could override everyone else's rights. In the end, the answer was clear. No, they couldn't get away with it. The law won. Democracy won. And a community became stronger for having gone through the fire. Sometimes that's what it takes. Sometimes you have to stand in your driveway, throw a breaker, and watch the lights go out before people wake up and realize that change is necessary. The lights came back on, eventually, powered by a proper system with clear rules and legitimate authority. But they came back on in a better place, a community that had learned from its mistakes and chosen a different path. And somewhere on a roof in Sunset Hills, my solar panels continued to generate power. A quiet monument to the idea that doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, can change everything for the better.